This will be showing how to assemble the magazine. First, you have to take off all the brims that was on the magazine. I took it off already because I forgot that I had to record this. But basically, you're just going to take a pair of pliers and just kind of like, just take them off. Next, you're going to take the cups. These are what actually push the dart along the barrel. And you're going to scrape all the brim off of that. This section right here is not brim, it is actually a functional part of the design, so make sure not to cut that off if possible. I'm going to cut forward once I'm done with doing all 10 of these. It is very important that these latches have the back side of them perfectly cleared off. There cannot be any brim inside of the latch, otherwise it will not lock in place. So make sure you clean that specifically more than anything else. Alright, I have now cleaned off 10 of these little cup things. And now we're going to put them together. The way they go is like this. You have the cup with the open side facing up, and the little latch with the this side facing the same direction. You put them together, go like that, kind of wiggle it in, and then once it's in, it'll kind of lock in place a little bit, but if you pull it down, it'll pop out. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take a rubber band, and we put that in there, take the rubber band, kind of stretch it out a little bit, slot that in there, and if it pops out, it's not a big deal, you just put it back in. And then you take the rubber band and you just kind of like push it in, and then you pull down into there, and it should just snap in place. So now when you pull on the rubber band, it'll automatically latch. And we're going to use that in here to latch it. I'm going to repeat the process 10 times and then get back to you. Okay, I have assembled 10 of the cups, and now I have to get the magazine prepared to put the cups in there. So first, we're going to go to the back of the magazine, and we're going to slot a piece of 1.75-inch filament into it. Essentially, the filament is what the rubber bands slide against to prevent the sharp edges of the 3D printed stuff from like abrading away the rubber bands and causing it to prematurely fail. So I'm just going to cut off a couple of about 2-centimeter pieces, 2 for now, and then a couple of, just a little bit longer than the magazine is, pieces. Just like that. And just for now, just 2 of them. And like that. First things first. First, I'm just going to check the tightness. If it's a bit too loose, I'm going to crimp the edge of the filament to make it tight. For example, this one is very loose. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take the filament, and I'm just going to go to the end of it and lightly just kind of crimp it. You would probably want to use an actual pair of pliers for this instead of the cutters, because it'll be a bit easier. Anyway, I'm just kind of squeezing that down until it gets a bit expanded, and I'm just going to do that a couple more times. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to push that in there. And use the tool to kind of squeeze it in there. Just make sure that it's not sticking out the back, otherwise it will block the rails and prevent the gun from cycling. And for the first piece, you can cut it off, but for the rest of them, don't cut off the excess. Otherwise, it'll be impossible to remove. And you might need to remove it if you want to replace the filament if it breaks or something. Okay, now I'm just going to do the other side. That one's pretty tight, so I'm not going to crimp it. And as you can see, it is blocking both of those holes. So now I'm just going to slide the main filament through there. And if it doesn't go in easily, cut the tip at a slight angle, and that should make it easier to go in. There we are. Now what you're going to do is, now that it's all the way in, pull this out until it's just kind of clearing there, and then cut it off. Just cut it off right at the base. And now, when you push it in with another little piece, you should have a clear hole in there. And once there's a clear hole, you just put in the other piece, slot that in, and now it should be good. This piece is a little bit loose, so I'm just going to crimp the end of it a little bit. There we are. And then this piece has a bit of filament left over. And you're going to use that, if you need to ever take this piece out, you're just going to grab it with a pair of pliers and pull it out. And then you'll be able to remove the long piece of filament. Next side. Just until it starts to come out. And there should be a clear hole in there. Now this one's a little bit too long, so I'm just going to cut it down. And then push that through there. Again, it's a little bit loose, so I'm going to crimp it. Push that in there. All right, so now we're ready to put the actual cups in there. So as you can see, there's a square, and the square is on that side of the magazine. So you're going to line up the little latch so that it's gonna be pushed back like that. Like so. So when it goes all the way to the back, you can see the latch pops out like that. And you're just going to do that for all of them. Okay, now that that's done, we're going to do the same thing to this side as we did to the other side, where we're going to put in 2 of these end blockers and then put the rails in. Oops. Yeah, it's still a bit too loose. There we go for that one. When you slide this in, make sure you don't stab any of the rubber bands, because you don't want the rubber bands to get messed up. Now we're just going to do the same thing as the other side. Pull it out a little bit. Cut it off. Push it in. And then cut ourselves a new end stop. And if required, crimp it. That's still really not very tight. There we go. Load the other rail. All right. So now what the deal is all these things can come out, and they will be stopped by the red filament from actually falling out. I'm just going to cut this one down a little bit more. Now we have to string it. Take the loop and pull it all the way back. So it's just coming over the back like that. And it should be flat all the way down. Flat all the way along. And then we repeat the process for all of them. Be careful when going in this direction, because it can pull out of the little grooves that you used to slot it in there in the first place. So I recommend only doing the last couple of them like that. And maybe holding it down with your fingers while you string it. As you can see, they're all flat. Now you will need to push all these rubber bands into the grooves that they go into. I like to use the Allen wrench for this. It's just pretty stiff. And just kind of pull it up and push it over. All right, that's done. And before we do anything else, let's just oil it up a little bit. It does absolutely need to be lubricated. And it's just going to need a drop of oil on the front of each of these little red, essentially bearings that the rubber band is sliding along. So just one drop of it on all of these. And try to get it so that the actual filament gets wet, because that'll make it a bit easier. Okay. Now that there's oil on it, you're just going to take like a pen or something and just kind of slowly push down on it until you feel the resistance get really low. So it should be really easy to just push it down. But if you push it down too quickly, you may snap the rubber band. So it'll be really hard, and then it'll get really easy as the oil like saturates the rubber band or whatever. There we go. And if it's having a really hard time going down, you can just put a little bit more oil on it, and it should fix the problem. Take the extra oil and just kind of like, you can either wipe it off with your on a paper towel or just like wet the rubber bands with it. It doesn't really matter. Okay, so this one had a problem. At the moment, I can see into it, and it looks like the rubber band has slipped off of the little latch. You can't see that, but I can. So all we have to do is unstring it. And that's why I included these grooves. Unstring it, just kind of like take it off, pull it through, and just pull it out. If it doesn't want to pull out, you can use pliers or even take like a 3/16 wooden dowel and push it through the back until it comes out. As you can see here, the string has gone into the crack between the catch and the shot cup, I guess. So I'm just going to restring it real quick, and hopefully it doesn't lose confinement again. You know, it's really not supposed to be that easy to push in. I think I think that my 3D printer ran out of filament, and when I replaced it, it like kind of messed up the height or something. But it's not supposed to have tolerances that large. Anyway, let's try that again. And of course it doesn't work again. Let's see what happened. It appears that it got messed up once again. I'm just going to redo that. It's possible that it's a bad cup, but I think it's just, oops. However, I think that it's just a, I don't know, bad tolerance error or something. I'll try holding on to the rubber band as I push it in. Okay, I'm looking into it and it looks like it's good. So I'm just going to make sure that the rubber band is seated properly. And it's actually a little bit easier to push in when it's a bit oily. Okay, so now all these things are all loaded and they all work. Just gonna do a double check. There we go. And it's not a good idea to dry fire these because the actual dart itself absorbs some of the energy and prevents it from damaging itself. All right, I'm just gonna load them all up real quick. Right now I'm just using some Dart Zone chili darts I found at Target for about, I want to say about 15 bucks for a pack of 200. So that's a pretty good deal. So now, if you want to test the that the action actually works, which, I mean, it's pretty simple, it should work. But sometimes if the printer messed it up or if the tolerances were really, really bad, it'll like have a lot of friction. So you just hit the little trigger right there like so. Make sure you point away from your face or anything you don't want to shoot. Pull the trigger, and the dart will go flying into the distance. And the fact that you can just pull those triggers individually is what makes it semi-automatic. And as you can see, they all pop out a little bit. That's fine. You just gotta push them in again. Yeah, it's not too hard. Sometimes it is kind of hard. There we go. So that is the process of setting up one of the magazines that you've 3D printed. This one is 2 colors because I ran out of white filament halfway through the print and I just replaced it with green. Step 1. This is not required, but it is recommended that you do this. I'm going to super glue the middle frame section to the pistol grip section. First, take off any sort of brim that you left on from all the parts, because you don't want that to get glued on. Next, take the pistol grip and the middle frame section and thread the screws through that. They should just go straight in. Next up, you're going to take the top section and put it onto the bottom section. You have to make sure to line up all these holes. Now take an Allen wrench and just lightly screw it on. Make sure you don't over tighten the screws. next up, you're just going to take a small amount of super glue and go along the edge like that while applying a bit of pressure to the handle to create a gap. And then repeat on the other side. And then you're going to take some sort of clamping device, in my case just a couple of these cheap little things, and clamp it on until it's dry. This could take a couple of hours. Next up, I will be showing how to set up the actual pistol assembly. I've taken off the clamps because I believe the super glue is dry by now, and I'm going to start by taking off all the brims from the various parts that were printed. You should really print these with, like, unless your printer has really bad bed adhesion, you should print them with mouse ear brims, because those are just the easiest ones to take off. They also use the least amount of filament, although, to be honest, brim filament isn't a substantial amount of filament, and I could print these with full brims and it wouldn't make a huge difference. Also explain these parts too. This is a ratchet-based design, so when you pull the trigger, it just pushes a ratchet forwards, and then when you release the trigger, this bit interfaces with the magazine and prevents it from coming back, and that's literally all it is. This is the trigger. You just pull this, and it'll like activate the mechanism. It'll pull the ratchet forwards, and then you release it, and the trigger will go forwards, and the ratchet will cycle the next, well, it'll cycle the next one when you pull the trigger down. This also needs a little bit of filament, not very much, so I mean a very short piece should work. Whatever excess you had from doing the magazine will probably be enough. This is the rotator. It is the main like bit that is holds everything else. It has two pieces of filament and that go into it, and it holds two objects. It holds this, which is the linking arm to the trigger, and it holds this, which is the ratchet pulling device. It looks visually similar to the ratchet pusher, but it's not the same, and this cannot go into that. They're not interchangeable. So first you look at this side, which is the side that you printed. This is the bottom, so that's the bottom. Push it forwards, so it's facing like this. This is the front of the gun. The ratchet faces like so. It is pointing to the left with the round side facing forwards. So just slot that in there, and then take a little piece of filament and push that in there. Now this feels a little bit loose, so I might crimp the filament in a similar way that I did to the magazine. You don't want the filament to fall out, otherwise it'll kind of brick your entire device. And it's not super important that you're able to take out these pieces of filament because it takes such a short period of time to actually reprint an entire mechanism that it's almost not worth it. So I'm going to crimp that pretty good to make it hard to take out. All right. So now we have this facing forwards. And just look down there, you should see the hole. Slot that in there. Use a little tool or something to push it in. It seems to be having a hard time coming in, so I'm just going to cut it so that the front is pointy. like so. And then I'm gonna just slot it in there. Yes, much easier. And give it a bit of a push for good measure. And it should be relatively freely able to move. If it's not like, if it doesn't like fall, it's not a big deal, but it can't have too much friction, but I think this will be good. Next up, you take the ratchet pull, you take the linking arm side, and you go back to this where it's the bottom facing front. The linking arm, the cutout goes down, so it's like that, and then you just slot that into there. And I'm gonna get another piece ready. And really crimp it. And just insert that there. And I need to give it a little bit of a point. This part is unfortunately a little bit fiddly. Okay, it looks like I'm having an actual problem. I think what happened is that this part, the base, the very first layer got squished a little bit too much, so I'm just going to ream it out with my cutter. That should hopefully work. See, I don't feel too bad if you're struggling a little bit with this. I mean, I'm the one who designed this, and I struggle a little bit with it. Unfortunately, it's hard to make a design that is both compact and also easy to assemble. I'm just gonna pull that in a little bit, and then you're gonna want to just cut off the excess once it's seated properly. So it spins relatively freely, you know, pretty good. So now you're just gonna push it in like that, and it should collapse like so. Maybe give it a couple of cycles just to make sure it's good. Now we have this. Now we have to string it like so. Up and over. And there you are. And I'm going to show you how to put the ratchet mechanism in. So I've taken out this supports, but there's still more supports that need to be taken out. First of all, there's this little guy, which you can just use the ratchet itself to just kind of wrench out, not too hard. Take that out. And then there's also this little guy up here. And this is a slot for a hex, a little nut. So if you're using M3x12mm screws, you just slap a nut in there and it'll help you put it on without stripping out the plastic. So here we have the ratchet puller, or sorry, the ratchet pusher. It's going to go in here like this. And it's going to just sit in there and go back and forth. But first I'm going to put a rubber band on it. With this, you're going to need to twist it twice. So once like so. And then once again in the other direction like so. And hopefully it's in a state where it's not going to get all bunched up. Okay. So I'm just going to put that on there. And this part's a bit annoying. I need two hands for it and the table. So you're just going to slot it into the little post I made. Tap it down with this Allen wrench. And now this rubber bands are all good. And now you're going to need to kind of turn it a bit. And slot it into the... There, right there. So it should be good to let go for a second. And now you're going to need a piece of filament again, about 2 centimeters. Crimp it. So now you're going to take this and line it up with the hole so you can see light through it. I can see light through it. So I'm just going to insert this through there. There we go. It latched in place. And you're just going to finish off by pushing the little filament in deeper so it's tight. And there we are. That's the ratchet mechanism in place. Now we're going to essentially string the trigger and put this in the gun. So now you're going to need a 20mm M3 screw. If you look at the description, I have everything linked to places you can buy them. Home Depot sells them, McMaster Car sells them. I bought a pack of 50 from McMaster Car for like $7. They're not even that expensive, to be honest, but their shipping costs a lot. If you were to buy this from Home Depot, it'd be about $5–6 worth of screws to do this entire thing. But since I bought a pack of 100 of like the 12mm and like 50 of the 20mm, it's a lot cheaper because I'm making a lot of these. But you don't need to do that because you're probably only going to be making a couple. So now, take the mechanism, and what happens is this points forwards and this points to the left. And you just put that in there. For now, I'm just going to slot this screw in from the top to prevent it from falling out while I string it. I'm going to then take the screw out and insert it from the bottom. You're going to take another rubber band, and this is kind of calibrated for you to put it in the second slot. I made a bunch of slots just to make it easier to like test it, and I found that the second slot was the best result. I have other slots in there in case you have other sized rubber bands that you could use, so you're not limited to only using the size 32 rubber bands for stringing it. Although if you don't have any size 32 rubber bands, you probably won't be able to put the magazine together anyway. But regardless, it's not a big deal to have an extra couple slots on the thing. So you just kind of loop it around. Like so. I'm going to get a piece of filament to kind of like wedge it in there. This part's a little bit annoying if you don't have very much practice, but I'm sure you'll get it. Okay. So now that that's done, when you pull this back, the mechanism should turn, and it does. Next up is the trigger. So this is the front of the trigger, and this is where you go like that. So I'm going to put it in like so, in between the rubber band, and I'm going to pull back on the like fire control group, I guess. So now that that's going in there, you just push down, and it should just kind of like slot in easily, release the pressure, and now the trigger is ready to go. So now you just pull the trigger, and this whole thing should just spin when you pull the trigger. So right now what I'm going to do, and this is a little bit tedious, but I'm going to take my finger and kind of push on this to provide pressure to oppose these rubber bands. And I'm going to take out this screw. And I'm going to reinsert the screw into the bottom. There is an easier way to do this, and that's to put the screw in from the bottom to start out with, and then use an M3 nut to hold it in place while you work on it. And that is actually what I recommend doing. I'm only doing this to demonstrate how to put this together if you don't have any M3 nuts. It looks like it got dislatched from the trigger, so you just pull that back a little bit and reseat it. Okay, so now the whole mechanism is all set up. And all we're going to do is put the top cover back on. This both centers the axle and prevents these from slipping off. Now you just kind of put that on and then push down. Give this guy a little bit of a turn to kind of get that setted, and then take your Allen wrench and start screwing it down. Make sure you don't over tighten these screws, otherwise it'll strip out the plastic. I do actually highly recommend that you use M3 nuts, but it will work if you don't have them. And if the design actually turns out to be really reliable, you could even probably just hot glue or just super glue it all together. You won't be able to take it apart after that, but it would be a bit more sturdy. Also, if it's your first time doing this, I recommend you don't tighten this down all the way to begin with. Like, the moment you tighten it down a couple threads, just test to make sure that this works with the magazine you created. So just pretend that I only tightened it a couple threads. The way the magazine works is these point in the direction that it moves. I uploaded a new version where they have arrows on them which face in the direction that they go, as well as arrows on this, so they all point in the same way. That'll make it a bit easier. So just pull the trigger, and you should hear it click, and it should reset easily. So there you go. Okay, that looks tight enough. It's all good. Trigger works. And you're actually gonna need 4 of these guys because there is one screw slot over here. This prevents you from like basically just taking that like that. Let me just load this up real quick. The magazine should be loose enough that you can just load the darts in like so. Now, if you have exceptionally weak darts, it'll be hard to push it all the way down. These darts are pretty foamy, so it is sometimes a struggle, but for the most part, it's not too bad. Unless that happens. Just shove it in there, whatever. Keep in mind, this is not the most accurate Nerf gun. It's like maximum range of about 15 feet. So if I was to put it in like this, what would happen is you could push it. No, actually, no, you couldn't push it through. It would just get stuck. So you'd have to pull it out again, flip it over to the right side, latch it in, and once it's done, pulling the trigger doesn't do anything. If you tilt the gun, the magazine will pull out. And yeah, that's about it.